I've always prided myself on being disciplined and well-mannered, qualities that have shaped every aspect of my life, especially when it comes to raising my children. 3 of them are from my first wife, who passed away suddenly, leaving me to navigate the overwhelming task of single fatherhood. Then there are the twins, the children I share with my current wife, Julie. Julie is 12 years younger than me. Yes, I've heard the whispers, the comments. At 48, I find myself balancing the complexities of parenthood, marriage, and the relentless demands of my career. We've always been an odd pairing, I suppose. She has a taste for luxury, an appreciation for the finer things in life. I, on the other hand, have never been one to indulge for the sake of it. Money, in my view, is a tool, not a trophy. It should be spent wisely, especially when children are involved. I've always kept a watchful eye on how much Julie spends, not out of stinginess, but because I believe in living within our means. More importantly, I want our children to understand the value of money. Life doesn't always hand you luxuries. You have to work for them. Some might wonder why I married someone so different from myself, someone whose desires often seemed at odds with my own. It's a fair question. The truth is, Julie came into my life at a time when I was trying to rebuild, trying to move forward from the grief that had consumed me after my first wife's passing. My children needed someone they could accept, someone who could bring light back into our home. Julie had a way of fitting in, of making things feel normal again. Most of the time, at least. My oldest daughter, Melissa, never quite warmed to her. But I'll get to that. Julie had all the right qualities, or so I believed. She was charming, kind, intelligent. She had a degree in finance, had even worked for me before we married. I trusted her, not just with my heart, but with my business. And yes, I won't pretend her youth wasn't part of the appeal. It was. But it wasn't just that. In the beginning, life with Julie was easy. She was attentive to the twins, engaged in their upbringing, present. But there was always a certain friction between her and Melissa, an underlying tension that never truly faded. They clashed over the smallest things. I never understood why. I assumed it was because Melissa had spent more time with her mother, that she saw Julie as an intruder rather than a stepmother. Maybe she resented the attention I gave her. Or maybe she simply saw something in Julie that I, blinded by love or need, had overlooked. For years, things seemed fine, or fine enough. But then, little by little, cracks began to form. Julie started complaining about money, claiming that the allowance I gave her wasn't enough to manage the household and her personal needs. At first, I didn't understand. The numbers didn't add up. What I provided should have been more than sufficient. Yet, she insisted, pushing for more. I began to question myself. Was I being too frugal? Too rigid? I was on the verge of giving in, of increasing her budget, when Melissa came to me with something that changed everything. My daughter is insightful, like her mother. She sees things, reads between the lines. That night, she walked into my study, her expression grave. Without a word, she handed me a receipt from a high-end restaurant I hadn't set foot in for over a year. I found this in Julie's room, she said. Julie and I have separate offices in the house, personal spaces we retreat to during the day. While we share a bed, we like having places of our own. So naturally, my first question was why Melissa had been snooping. But she didn't flinch. She told me she had noticed something was off with Julie. The way she smiled at her phone, the way she rushed to check her messages like a teenager with a crush. She had become distant, detached, even from the twins. That was the part that unsettled me most. Julie had always been so devoted to them. At first, I dismissed Melissa's concerns. Stress, I told myself. Julie was just overwhelmed. But then my daughter said something that stuck with me. I have a bad feeling. So she had gone looking for answers, and found them. There were 3 receipts in total, each from extravagant restaurants, each for what appeared to be a table for 2. The amounts were staggering, hundreds, even over $1,000. And none of these places were in our usual area. These weren't casual outings. These were dates. Melissa said nothing else. She simply handed me the receipts and walked away. I could see it in her eyes. Hurt, disappointment. But more than that, She was angry. Not just at Julie. At me. I should have seen it sooner. That night, I confronted Julie. I didn't storm in, didn't raise my voice. I simply sat across from her and placed the receipts on the coffee table. Who are you seeing that's racking up these bills? She barely reacted. A flicker of surprise, quickly masked. Then, in an almost bored tone, she dismissed it. Just my best friend. We've been going out to unwind. Things have been stressful. The way she said it was too smooth, too rehearsed. And in that moment, I knew. She wasn't worried about the money. She was worried about how much I had figured out. For the next few weeks, I played the role of the unsuspecting husband. I smiled, nodded, pretended. Meanwhile, I started watching. Checking her phone when I had the chance, reviewing her phone bills. And that's when I found it. A pattern. Late-night calls. Repeated messages to a number that wasn't saved in her contacts. Always at odd hours. My wife wasn't just spending my money. She was spending it on someone else. I've always prided myself on being disciplined and well-mannered, qualities that have shaped every aspect of my life, especially in raising my children. 3 of them are from my first wife, a woman I cherished deeply until she was taken from me suddenly and unexpectedly, leaving me to navigate the daunting role of a single father. Then, there are the twins, my children with my current wife, Julie. Julie is 12 years younger than me, and I've heard all the comments about the age gap. At 48, I find myself juggling the demands of fatherhood, marriage, and my career, trying to maintain the balance between responsibility and stability. We've always been an odd match, she and I. She adores the finer things in life, luxury, extravagance, indulgence. I, on the other hand, have never been one to throw money around for the sake of appearances. Wealth should be used wisely, especially when children are involved. I've always believed that children are more observant than we give them credit for. They learn from what they see, and I wanted mine to grow up with a clear understanding of financial discipline. That's why I kept an eye on Julie's spending, not because I was stingy, but because I wanted our household to remain within sensible limits. Still, I often wondered why I had married someone so different from me. Someone who craved the kind of lavish lifestyle I never prioritized. The answer was simple. Julie came into my life at a time when I needed someone the most. After my first wife's passing, I struggled with the crushing weight of grief. My children needed someone they could tolerate, someone who wouldn't disrupt the fragile dynamic we had. Julie fit that role, or so I thought. She was fun, kind, intelligent, and ambitious. She had a degree in finance from some vague university and had even worked for me, which is how we met. At first, life with her was easy. She doted on the twins, was actively involved in their upbringing, and seemed insightful in ways I appreciated. But there was always tension between her and my eldest daughter, Melissa. The 2 of them clashed constantly, bickering over the smallest things. I assumed Melissa resisted Julie's presence because she had spent more time with her mother and didn't want anyone replacing her. Or maybe, deep down, she saw something in Julie that I had been too blind to notice. For years, Julie had everything she wanted: a beautiful home, financial security, a family. Life should have been perfect for her, yet something changed. She began complaining that the money I provided wasn't enough, that she struggled to manage the household and her personal expenses. I found it baffling. We weren't struggling, and I knew precisely how much was being spent. It simply didn't add up. But she insisted, again and again, that things were tight. I started to doubt myself, wondering if I was being too strict, too controlling. I considered increasing her allowance, thinking maybe I was the problem. But then, Melissa came to me with something that changed everything. One evening, my eldest daughter walked into my study, her expression unreadable. Without a word, she handed me a receipt from an upscale restaurant, one I hadn't been to in over a year. "I found this in Julie's room," she said simply. Julie and I had separate spaces in the house, our own offices where we worked during the day. We still shared a bed, but we valued having our own corners of solitude. My first reaction was to question why Melissa had been snooping. But she didn't flinch. She told me she'd noticed strange things: Julie acting secretive, glued to her phone like a teenager in love, smiling at every notification, slipping away at odd hours. Most disturbingly, she had stopped spending time with the twins. That was the part that truly shook me. Julie had always been attentive, so why was she suddenly neglecting them? I brushed off Melissa's concerns at first, telling myself Julie was just stressed. But my daughter's words stayed with me, gnawed at the back of my mind. Melissa wasn't a child anymore. She was perceptive, just like her mother had been. And the hurt in her eyes when she handed me that receipt told me everything I needed to know. That night, I confronted Julie. I didn't storm in, I didn't wave the receipts in her face. Instead, I walked into the living room, sat across from her, and placed them gently on the table between us. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice quiet. "Who are you taking out to these places?" She looked up from her phone, startled for only a second before recovering. With a dismissive shrug, she claimed it was her best friend. They had been going out to relieve stress, to have a little fun. As her husband, I should understand. Her response was too rehearsed. She was lying. And she wasn't worried about the money. She was terrified I had figured out the truth. For weeks, I played along. I acted the part of the clueless husband, never revealing what I knew. I even gave her more money, letting her believe she had me wrapped around her finger. She thought she was winning, that I was blind to her deception. Meanwhile, I hired a private investigator. It didn't take long for the truth to unravel. Julie wasn't just having an affair. She was funding her secret lover's lifestyle with my money. A younger man, a nobody, the kind of leech who clings to women like her for financial support. The lavish dinners. The late nights. The unexplained expenses. All for him. The investigator provided everything. Photos, messages, even videos. I watched in disgust as my wife, the woman who had promised me loyalty, flaunted herself for this pathetic excuse of a man. She had been lying to my face, playing the role of the perfect wife while betraying me in the worst way possible. But I wasn't going to confront her. No, that would have been too easy. Julie didn't deserve an easy escape. I was going to make sure she paid for every ounce of betrayal. First, I secured my finances, quietly transferring assets, closing off her access, ensuring she had nothing to fall back on. Then, I built my case. By the time I was ready, she was financially and legally trapped. When I finally handed her the divorce papers, her world crumbled. She sobbed, begged for an explanation, but I gave her nothing. No closure, no discussion. Just a quiet, calculated end. She tried to fight back in court, but she never stood a chance. The evidence buried her. In the end, she walked away with next to nothing, a small settlement that would barely sustain her for a year. She lost the house, the money, the children's respect. Even her lover abandoned her when things got tough. But I wasn't done. Julie had built her reputation on status, on appearances. So I shattered it. I sent the evidence to her friends, her family, the elite social circles she adored. Invitations disappeared. Her name became synonymous with scandal. And now, she's left with nothing. No money, no status, no respect. Just the bitter realization that she gambled everything, and lost. And I sleep soundly at night, knowing justice was served.